Yes, Viola had a question
Well,
first.
I just
and
wanted
then-
to comment on Rick because I live in that area, that's Vickery Meadow. And I partied there in the 70s, then I worked there in the 80s, and then I lived there in the 90s. So, you know, that's been a big area of mine. But I think the approach that you took was very important, and that you didn't come in and tell them, you know, what they needed to do. Because you're right, very many people come in and tell them. Because there's so many nationalities that live there. And we have to remember that these people are refugees, basically. You know, and they don't know who their neighbor is, if they're Muslims or they're, yeah, I mean, I live between somebody who came from Bosnia and somebody who came from another country that was against them, but anyhow, and yet we would have coffee together in the afternoon. They didn't speak my language, I didn't speak theirs, but we had one common thing, that was a cup of coffee. So I think you came in with one common thing, and that was to listen to them. And you did that very well. And also, they were new to that location. So I don't think you were ever an outsider because they were outsiders. So you became a part of them. And I think, you know, I'm hearing through the community that this project is going very well. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to work with you, but the word is out that this is going very well. So I applaud you for what you're doing.
And not everybody thinks like that.
Oh yeah, we've had some moments out there.
And you are part of it, Viola. I guess
Oh,
you
thank
just
you.
didn't know yet.
Yeah, right. We haven't told you. We haven't told you the part that we would think that you might be. But anyway.
So Leah.
Yeah, so the other day somebody said something to me that I think is very fitting for this conversation. A friend of mine, he said, you can give a man a fish or you can teach him to fish, right? Like, that's what I thought he was going to say, but he didn't say that. He said you can give a man a fish or you can learn to fish with him, have a great time in the process and learn something from each other. And I feel like that's very representative of what we're talking about. And today, I was in Vickery at Conrad High School all day long talking to the art students there about the project, and we're going to be decorating this crazy trolley thing together. And I kept saying to them, like, I'm not going to tell you what to do. Like, I'm going to provide the materials, and we're going to figure it out together. And, you know, as a group, we're going to decide which ideas are good, which ideas maybe we can't do. And one of the kids was like, well, you know, maybe we should have a theme. I was like, okay, so what should the theme be? And the kids sat there, this group of high school students, like 14, 15 years old, and they said, well, you know, there's like 50 different countries represented at our school. And, you know, they essentially what they said is it's our diversity that unifies us, and it's our diversity that brings us together. So maybe we can make this float representative of that. I didn't say any of it. I didn't lead it. They came to that on their own, and I felt like it was very representative of the project, of your approach, the way that you're, you know, going about doing all of this. That's it.
Yeah, I think in this work, the process is as valuable as the end result, for sure. I know that's always been, for me anyway, it's, you know.
Unfortunately, the process so often is the most beautiful part of it, and it ends up getting lost in the history of redevelopment. So how do you hang on to that story, and how do you not lose that? Like it is being lost.
Well, you know, I don't know. I've had to, you know, you have to compromise, or I've had to compromise. I mean, I make compromises and decisions all the time, and especially because I'm working in partnership with government, with NGOs, with other artists, with scientists, or whatever the project is, where you know, you come together and you do listen. I mean, I call it, you have a listening tour. And then, but I have many things that were not maybe the decisions I would have made if I had just my way. You know, but you know, and I can't hang on to that. I mean, the process does that, you know, and takes care of that, and I don't mourn that really, or.
Can I ask? Daryl?
Yeah. So, how do you evaluate the process or the end result of these types of projects. Like Rick talked about, and everyone reiterated, listening, being still. So it seems like that might be one thing to think about. But what are some other things that can make a project like this less problematic or more problematic?
I mean, as far as its aesthetic evaluation, or as far as its, you know, it's like what rates it as a success or not?
Do you have to measure things for grants at row houses? Do you have to?
Yeah,
you know, look
but
at-
I consider that separate than the art part of
right.
that I'm concerned with. I mean, grant people want to know stuff.
Right.
You know, and you have to do that, but that's
That's
separate to me than the other part.
Right. Which is the other part aesthetics? No, what's the other part?
Oh God, there are a lot of things. There are a lot of things. In
Just two would be great.
just two. You know,
Sustainability?
warm smiles.
Fuzzy kittens. Don't you look at it like, for instance, with row houses? I mean, sustainability is one of the marks of its. I mean, it's morphed, it's changed, it's done different things over the years, but it's still there, and people are still actively involved in it from the neighborhood. Every time I go down there and I see little kids learning to play dominoes with the kid, you know, with the people that my son learned to play dominoes with there, I know that there's this continuum about that place that even though it's different than when I did my first house down there, it's still vibrant for that community.
But I also think though I because I'm trained as a painter, right? And so every step I make in my process, I use that training and that way of thinking about it, you know, to kind of tell me stuff. And I think one of the thing for me is that it's all intuitive. You know, I mean, there are times when it's going and you just say, you know, it's like you're making a painting or a sculpture or whatever. You do it and people might be coming in saying, oh, this looks great, you know, but you just say, this is shit, I'm not, you know, this is just not it. Mm-hmm. You know, and there's just something that just triggers for me, you know, and so I will, you know, so there are times when a project might be, you know, everybody's excited about it. And I've had this conversation with the translation team too. It's like, you know what? I probably shouldn't say this too soon because we're not through it. But I keep saying, you know, this is, you know, the rough edges hadn't come up yet. You know, where are the rough edges? You know, and so to me sometimes if it happens too easily, you know, it's like, I don't know, you know, did we not push it enough, you know, or was there something left that we were, you know, we didn't challenge ourselves in a certain way, you know? Or sometimes when it's like, you know, every signal in the world is just saying, stop. Just stop, go home. But there's, you know, an intuitive thing that says, you know what? I know it doesn't look right, it doesn't feel right, whatever, but there's something, well, that was the story actually of, and maybe the most challenging parts of the Vickery Meadow project was on the front end. Because I started coming here in, when was that party I came to your house?
July last year.
July last year. And I started coming regularly in October. And it was all the way till January. And going into February. And by January, I was about to tell the Nasher, like, you know what? There's nothing coming. You know, I'm sorry, you know, thanks for the invitation, but it's just not. And that's my attitude. If nothing comes, then you just don't do it just because you have the, you know, the invitation to do it. But then it did, you know, something did kind of click in a little way. But you know, so that's, you know, that project could have easily have just like been X'd out by December.
So then that if you can't define success, can you speak to failure projects that you all have failed or that have been failures?
What's that?
Rick?
Oh, I've got some.
LA.
I've got some. You know, but rather than saying failures, it's much more that they are, you know, they may have, they're complicated learnings, you know, or whatever. Just there's always something to learn about it, right?
Okay, Rick.
So the Watts House project, you know, I mean, I learned something from that was
The what project?
Watts House project in LA. You know, I learned that it's of no little consequence when the people that you bring into a project and how in the way that you manage the relationships with them coming in, because the person who I basically mentored on that project, I misread. Yeah, I misread them completely, and it turned into something that was pretty ugly for that community. You know, in that blog that you're talking about, Rick, in the last one, somebody kept quoting me on this one thing because one of my responses was something I had said to another artist, Terry Atkins, and we were talking about another artist, and I said, I think he's got a lot of bullshit in what he does, right? But I said, you know, bullshit is not bad in the art world. Because in fact, in the art world, they basically expect it. It kind of helps you out if you're bullshitting, you know, it's like, it's exciting. But the thing is, though, is that when the bullshit starts to stink in the art world, they just sweep you out the door and pick up the next bullshit, right? But when the bullshit starts to stink in a community, then those people can't just sweep you out. They have to live with the stench, you know, and that's where it gets to be a little bit crazy. And so, you know, the project in LA, I mean, that community is still at this point, you know, trying to work its way out of the damages that happened because of the, you know, and I have to take some responsibility for that because, you know, I brought the artist into it, and you know, and it just. And I didn't kind of engage in a way that I would have, with hindsight, I would have engaged in a deeper way.
So I guess one of the questions, sort of extending on that point, what do you look for, what do you think about with collaboration, not only with your colleagues or other artists, but also, as you said, there's certain institutional support that's needed to make a project successful. How do you try to balance the needs of a community versus the needs to collaborate with other artists and other individuals? If the Nasher comes and says, we want to support this project versus, I know in Dallas, Red Bull tries to do a lot of art events and they try to support local artists, and like I said, there's a difference not only in the type of support, but the amount of support. So thinking on the success and the community, how do you try to balance the needs of the community and what you envision successful collaboration would be?
You do that.
Well, okay, so one of the MAP projects is, the DMA is a partner for one of the MAP projects. And I first started talking to them in July of last year. And so MAP has launched today, it's the first day. And I've been working on it here for 2 years. So it took 2 years to do this whole thing. And in the conversations with the DMA, I was talking to Susan Diachizin, who is the manager of Center for Creative Connections, because she is very interested in engaging community. As you know, you've worked with her and worked with the center there. And it seemed like an obvious place to enter the museum. So I cold called her, and she agreed to a meeting. And we started to talk about, I talked about this framework and what MAP did and what could we do, or what would we do. I had no idea what it was. I didn't come in with a project. I just came in with this kind of idea was the project. And so we came up with some different ideas, and she was very interested in this global network of artists that are a part of MAP, and how would the center could engage that. And I came up with all these different plans that involved artists coming in and out, and partnering with local artists, and partnering with local artists who are from different communities and have different backgrounds, bringing in whatever they did. So anyway, we talked and talked and talked and talked and talked. And then at the same time, the museum was undergoing its identity change and its new mission statement and becoming, you know, opening its doors for free and all that stuff. And so what I finally recognized in all of our conversations, what wasn't happening was they were talking a lot about community, and there was this whole new thing about community, but no one was asking the community about the community. No one, you know, it's like open the doors for free and they will come, you know, and I said, so who talked to the community folks about what they would like to, so I said, why don't you just do that? And so I became the liaison to do that, and worked with an organization called Avance, which I had a connection to, and had community members came to the museum this summer, twice a week, and they have produced, which will launch in November as a part of MAP, the first Spanish language guide to the museum in the history of the museum. And they're not trained as historians, they're not trained as artists, they're not trained as people who write about art. They just looked at they went for 2 months, looked at the collection, we did workshop, and they just found that they liked that painting of flowers, and they liked it because it reminds me of this or whatever they did, and they talked about it and they wrote it. And so starting in November, you can go and get a bilingual guide to the DMA, to parts of the DMA that takes you through this tour, and you can experience this work of art from this person who, from a point of view that historically has been undervalued and underrepresented. And that brings to the conversation an experience, a history, and an understanding of the world that I don't have as a white person, that I don't have as a person who's educated, that the museum certainly doesn't have. And that, to me, is the key to collaboration. That, to me, Vicki and I just did a workshop a couple weeks ago on racial equity. And one of the things I was talking about in our breakout groups was having African Americans on my board of directors, not because I want diversity, not because I need that thing, but because I do want diversity, but because there's a richness there, there's an experience, there's an understanding of the world that I don't have as me. And so those things, to me, that's what is important for me, is to get out of my framework that I walk around with that comes from my experience.
Yeah. So I know we have to wrap up, and I wanted to ask one last question because it's because I'm the moderator. And because I asked the first one. And I've been given the 5-minute sign.
But that was 10 minutes ago.
That was
I was just going to say that.
and I think we can go on. But I'm curious. This is one of the questions that I'm always wondering about. I mean, there's been social work going on for a long time. There's been activism, and there's been, this exchange, et cetera, over a long period of time. There were happenings in the late 60s and 70s, and you had all the Al Caponia. And when we talk about avant-garde is dead in art. Now people are saying, well, the new avant-garde is social practice. And you can argue with that, and you can decide, well, it's one thing that maybe we haven't really totally explored. And that dialogue can go on. But I'm curious, what is it about this time that suddenly this has become a movement in a way? Is there something particular about the time we're living in that now we have this attention, that we're paying tribute to this idea of community action and involvement, and it's happening through the art world?
Well, see, I don't think this is unique. If you look at the history of, for instance, the Harlem Renaissance, that's what that was all about. Those artists were doing the same thing. Elizabeth Catlett worked at Carver Elementary School, which was the communist headquarters for, so this is not new. I think that America goes through its trends, and they always cycle back, and, you know.
Or was it embraced by the art world at that time?
Our art world, I can't speak to yours, but, you know, I don't know what you people were doing, but, you know, we were having a good time doing that. And it usually is contained in the art world. I mean, because, like, you know, we talk about the Harlem Renaissance, but the reality is the majority of people in Harlem didn't know what that was. The artists did, and the people that they touched. I think the same thing is true of this work. I mean, the average person in my center they ain't talking about no social practice or any of this. They know that center is theirs and they can do certain things in it, but they don't have any need to put a label on it or to understand it from this standpoint. So I think that we need to really be clear that this is a discussion amongst us, and don't nobody else care.
But at the same time, I would hope we're evolving. And I mean, I think, Greg, to your point that, I agree with you 100%, but at the same time, I believe that something bigger is going on and that there's a reaction to this other thing that's going on. So we have this, you know, in Texas, we have Ted Cruz shutting down the government in one place, and we're all here doing. I mean, you know, there's other stuff going on. It's a response, an energetic response to it. So I believe it's something that it is a time. There's a response to the fact that in many ways, I think people are concerned that the world's in trouble in a big way, and that we need to get together and respond to it.
Yeah, I agree with both those statements. I guess I won't say anything.
Must be a community.
But I think I will. You know, it's like, you know how, I don't know what the scientific description of it is. You know, you start at one place and you end up getting back to the same place, but you're higher up. You know, you keep getting back to the same place, but you're going up. You're growing. And I think, you know, my ghetto philosopher mentor,
Jesse Lott?
No, Arthur Shaw. You remember Arthur Shaw? Yeah, real ghetto philosopher, who I spent years studying, and I don't remember any of it now, but, you know, Aristotle, Plato, Kant, and so on and so forth. And it was really interesting, but the thing I did remember from those years, was that, you know, I mean, so Plato had this idea of these universals, right? And all these things were connected somehow, you know. All the sciences were just, you know, and he had a poetic way of describing it. But then Aristotle came along and was like, you know, but you know, you can't understand the world like that. So he put everything, all these categories, everything categorized, you know. So physics was separate from chemistry, biology, all, you know. I think we spent the last 2,000 years maximizing what we can do from the separation of things. And, you know, the 20th century was this century of things coming back together, right? I mean, you know, all those sciences all began to, you know, relate to each other in a way. And I think similarly with the, you know, with the arts, as, you know, Sarah was saying, you know, if you go back and you look at tribal cultures, you know, you didn't have art separated out and, you know, social service separated out, all these kind of things separated out. But I think in order for us to progress in our understanding of the totality of ourselves in terms of this, you know, the spirit that we live with and how we grow it, you know, we have to separate it out. And it was separated out all the way to the point of modernism, which says that art has nothing to do with the rest of the world, anything else. And once it was pure, it had nowhere else to go. And so from that point, it has to integrate itself back. And I think we're at a point in time, you know, the last, you know, whether it's 50 years or so, that people have started to try to knit it back together. It may take another 100 years before it gets back to a point where nobody's talking about art as being a separate, special thing. But it would be very different than it was when people didn't think about art, you know, in a tribal situation.
Nice way to end that. Don't, lovely ending, Rick.